One basin in West Texas pumps more oil than every country in OPEC except Saudi Arabia, 6.6 million barrels a day, about half of everything the United States produces. The rock it comes out of is a coral reef, a real one from a tropical sea, and you can walk up onto the fossilized edge of it and stand on the reef crest. There's a town out there where the ground collapsed into a hole big enough to swallow a house, and then a second hole opened next to it. The Rio Grande, the river on the map that marks the border of the United States, does not always reach the sea. Some years it dries up in the desert before it gets there. And in a state everybody pictures as flat, the highest point in Texas is a reef. Nobody looks at this place and sees money. It is the most valuable ground in America. 30. One basin, more oil than every OPEC nation, but one. The Permian Basin sits under West Texas and southeastern New Mexico. The Energy Information Administration puts its crude output for 2026 at around 6.5 million barrels a day. That is roughly half of all United States crude production from one basin. Put it against the countries. Only Saudi Arabia produces more. Not Iraq, not Iran, not Kuwait, not the United Arab Emirates, not Nigeria, not Venezuela. One basin in the Texas desert beats them all. The Energy Information Administration has reported more active drilling rigs in the Permian than in the rest of the lower 48 states put together, and it has already produced over 30 billion barrels in its history, which means the 6.6 million a day is what is left. That is what comes out. Now what it comes out of, because it is not what you would guess. 29. The rock is a coral reef. The basin is named after the Permian period, and that is the clue. 260 million years ago, this was not desert. It was a warm, shallow sea near the equator, and the sea had a reef around its edge. Sponges, algae, bryozoans, crinoids. The reef built up over millions of years, the basin behind it filled with organic mud, and then the whole sea evaporated and buried the lot under salt and sediment. That organic mud is the oil. The stacked layers left by the reef and the basin are why operators out there talk about stacked pay, several producible formations sitting on top of each other, so one vertical hole passes through more than one payday. The Wolf Camp, the Sprayberry, the Bone Spring, an entire American energy industry sitting on a dead tropical reef. And part of that reef is not buried at all. 28. The highest point in Texas is a fossil reef you can climb, Guadalupe Peak, 8,751 feet. It is the highest ground in the state, and it is limestone laid down by that Permian reef. Next to it stands El Capitan, the sheer prow that early travelers used as a landmark for 100 miles. The Capitan Reef is one of the best preserved fossil reefs anywhere on Earth, and geologists come from around the world to study it because what is exposed above ground, there is the same formation that is producing oil underneath the basin floor. So you have the outcrop and the reservoir, the textbook and the bank vault in the same rock. Stand on the top of Texas and you are standing on the reef crest of a sea that dried up before the dinosaurs. Reefs need water. This place has almost none, except where it does. 27. There is a spring in the desert that pushes out 15 million gallons a day, San Solomon Springs at Balmahia. In the middle of arid West Texas, water comes out of the ground at a rate measured in the tens of millions of gallons a day at a constant 72 to 76 degrees. In the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps built a swimming pool around it. It is 1.3 acres, up to 25 feet deep, and it still has a natural bottom, gravel, algae, fish. There are 2 endangered species of desert pupfish living in a public swimming pool. The water arrives through the limestone from the mountains, which is the same plumbing that makes the whole region possible. Follow it back and it comes from the reef. Hold that. It is the answer at number 4. Water in the desert draws everything. So does the absence of it. 26. The biggest national park in Texas is also its emptiest. Big Bend covers over 800,000 acres in the crook of the Rio Grande. It is roughly the size of Rhode Island, and almost nobody goes. It is one of the least visited national parks in the country because the nearest commercial airport is hours away, and the park itself is 100 miles across. It's inside it are the Chisos Mountains, a mountain range entirely contained within one national park, and a fossil record that includes one of the largest flying animals ever known. Quetzalcoatlus northropi, a pterosaur with an estimated wingspan of over 30 feet, was discovered there in 1971. A creature the size of a small aircraft out of the same desert, 25. It has the darkest skies in the continental United States. Big Bend was certified as an international dark sky park, and it is routinely described as having the least light pollution of any national park in the lower 48. Up at the McDonald Observatory in the Davis Mountains, the University of Texas has been using that darkness since the 1930s. The Hobby Eberly telescope up there has one of the largest mirrors in the world, and the observatory has spent decades doing something unusual for a scientific institution. It negotiates with oil companies because gas flaring in the Permian throws light into the sky, and the boom moved the glow to within sight of the telescopes. There is now a formal dark skies program working with operators on shielded lighting, an observatory and an oil field arguing about the same night, 24, and there is a light out there nobody has explained, the Marfa lights. Reported since the 1880s, seen from a viewing area east of Marfa, looking towards the Chanati Mountains, they appear as glowing spheres that split, merge, hover, and vanish. There is an official viewing platform with a car park. The leading explanation is atmospheric refraction of car headlights on Highway 67, and controlled observations have matched a large share of sightings to traffic. Not all of them. Reports predate the car. So it is either a very old misidentification of something ordinary, or something ordinary that has been mistaken for a mystery, and after 140 years nobody has closed it out. That is the strangeness. Now the strangeness people built on purpose. A 23. A New York artist bought an army fort and filled it with aluminium boxes. Donald Judd came to Marfa in the 1970s, and he bought the decommissioned Fort D.A. Russell. Inside 2 artillery sheds, he installed 100 milled aluminium boxes, each the same outer dimensions, each different inside. Outside, 15 concrete works run across the grassland in a line about 1 kilometre long. The Chainati Foundation now draws visitors from around the world to a town of under 2,000 people, 7 hours from Houston. And out on Highway 90, 35 miles northwest, there is a permanent sculpture of a Prada shop. Built in 2005, never open, never intended to open, slowly weathering in the desert. The strangest concentration of contemporary art in America sits in a former cavalry post in the emptiest part of Texas. 22. There was a judge out here who held court in a saloon and named the town after an actress he never met, Roy Bean, Justice of the Peace at Langtry, on the Pecos in the 1880s and 90s. He ran his court out of a building he called the Jersey Lily and advertised himself as the Law West of the Pecos. He was infatuated with the English actress Lily Langtry, and the story he told was that he named the town for her. She reportedly visited less than a year after he died, and in 1896 he did something that tells you exactly what the Law West of the Pecos meant. Prize fighting was illegal in Texas and illegal in Mexico, so when the World Heavyweight Championship needed somewhere to happen, Bean staged it on a sandbar in the middle of the Rio Grande, technically in neither country. Spectators came by special train and watched from the bank. The fight lasted about 90 seconds. The building he ran it from is still standing, and Texas runs a visitor center at it. 21. Before any of them, this was one of the largest territories ever held by an indigenous power in North America, Comancheria. At its height, the Comanche controlled ground covering much of West Texas and beyond, an area frequently estimated at around 250,000 square miles. They did it on horses, and they did it for the better part of 2 centuries. Spanish, Mexican, and then American expansion all stalled against it. The thing that ended it was not a battle. It was the destruction of the southern bison herd in the 1870s, which removed the economy the whole system ran on, followed by the Red River War. The largest indigenous power on the continent was defeated by the removal of an animal. The bison went. Something else was put in its place, at a scale that is hard to picture. 20. There was a single ranch out here, bigger than some states. The XIT Ranch, in the Texas Panhandle and Northwest. 3 million acres. Texas paid for it in land rather than money. The state handed over 3 million acres of public domain in exchange for the construction of the state capitol building in Austin in the 1880s. 3 million acres is larger than the state of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. It was fenced with something on the order of 6,000 miles of barbed wire, so the Texas state capitol was purchased with a piece of West Texas the size of a small country. That is the land as an asset. Here is the land as a problem. 19. The river that marks the border of the United States does not always reach the sea. The Rio Grande runs 1,250 miles along the Texas border. It is on every map as a continuous blue line to the Gulf. It is not always continuous. In dry years, after irrigation withdrawals in Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico, stretches of it run dry. And the river has failed to reach the Gulf of Mexico in some years, ending in a sandbar. Above Presidio there is a section that goes dry so regularly it has a nickname among river people, the Forgotten River. The water is fully allocated by treaty and by compact, and the allocations were written when there was more water, an international boundary that is, in places and in some years, a dry riverbed. 18. And the aquifer behind the farmland is being emptied. North of the oil country, the Texas high plains sit over the southern end of the Ogallala Aquifer, the water that turned the panhandle into cotton, corn, and cattle feed. The southern Ogallala is the part in the worst condition. It recharges very slowly, in places barely at all, and in parts of the Texas high plains, the saturated thickness has fallen so far that irrigation is no longer viable. Some counties have already gone back to dryland farming, which means whatever the sky delivers, the oil under West Texas will run out eventually, and everybody knows it. The water is running out faster, and it gets a fraction of the attention. That is the water. Now the ground itself, which has started moving. 17. 2 holes opened in the desert near Wink, and they are still growing. Wink Sink 1 appeared in 1980. Wink Sink 2 appeared in 2002, about a mile away. They are collapsed sinkholes over the Hendrick oil field, and the mechanism is salt. Beneath that ground is a thick salt layer. And old boreholes let fresh water reach it. Salt dissolves. The roof over the cavity loses support and drops. The second sink has been monitored expanding for years. Satellite radar work by Southern Methodist University has found the wider area around Wink and Kermit moving, subsiding in some places, heaving upward in others, over abandoned wells and injection sites. There are thousands of old wells out there, many drilled before modern plugging standards existed. Nobody can say which one is next. 16. West Texas started having earthquakes, and they were not there before. The Permian Basin was seismically quiet for most of the 20th century. It is not now. Injection is the reason. Producing oil out there brings up enormous volumes of salt water, and the standard disposal method is to pump it back underground under pressure. That pressure can reach faults that have been locked for millions of years and let them slip. In November 2022, a magnitude 5.4 struck near Mentone, one of the strongest in Texas history. The Railroad Commission has since restricted deep injection in several areas. The state that produces the oil now regulates its own earthquakes. 15. For every barrel of oil, several barrels of water come up with it. This is the part of the industry. Nobody puts in an advert. Permian wells produce far more water than oil. The ratio varies by formation, but multiple barrels of water per barrel of crude is normal. That water is not water in any usable sense. It is brine, saltier than seawater, carrying dissolved hydrocarbons, metals, and sometimes naturally occurring radioactive material. It runs to billions of barrels a year across the basin, and almost all of it goes back down a disposal well, which is what causes number 16. An oil industry in a desert whose largest physical product by volume is undrinkable water. 14. They burn the gas because it is in the way. Natural gas comes up with Permian oil whether anybody wants it or not. Oil is easy to truck. Gas needs a pipeline, and pipeline capacity has repeatedly lagged behind drilling, so it gets flared, burned at the wellhead. At the peak of the practice, satellite imagery showed the Permian lit up at night on a scale visible from orbit comparable to a major city. Texas has tightened, permitting and flaring volumes have come down substantially, but it has not stopped. There is a straight line from this to number 25, the observatory arguing about the sky. A fuel valuable enough to fight wars over, set on fire because moving it was inconvenient. 13. The hottest town in Texas is on the border, and it is called the ugliest name in weather reporting, Presidio, on the Rio Grande. It regularly records the highest temperatures in the state, with summer readings well past 110. Across the river is Ojinaga. The pair of them sit in a bowl in the desert, with mountains on both sides. For years, Presidio's claim to fame in the national forecast was simply being the hot spot. Then, in 2018, the bridge to Mexico was closed for repairs, and the town lost a large share of its economy overnight, because the border crossing was the economy. A town whose infrastructure is one bridge, and whose weather is a warning. Quick pause, and this one is for the people who actually live out here. If you're watching from West Texas, Midland, Odessa, Lubbock, Amarillo, El Paso, Alpine, Marfa, Pecos, or one of the towns that only exists because of a well, I want to hear from you specifically. Every time I make one of these, Somebody in the comments knows a thing that is not written down anywhere. A road that buckled, a well that nobody plugged, a town that filled up in a boom and emptied in 18 months. Put it below. Tell me the place, the county, and the story. I read all of them, and the best ones end up in the next video, right? Number 12. And from here, it is all about the money. What it made, what it cost, and who is holding the bill. 12. Talingua died twice and came back as a chili cook-off. Before oil, the money out here was quicksilver, mercury. Talingua, near what is now Big Bend, was a cinnabar mining district. The Chisos Mining Company ran it, and at its height, it was one of the largest mercury producers in the United States, supplying detonators and munitions through 2 world wars. The price collapsed after the Second World War. The company went bankrupt in 1942. The town emptied. It is now a ghost town with a few hundred residents, and its main event is an international chili championship that began in 1967. The mine shafts are still out there in the ground, unmarked, 11. Midland and Odessa are 20 miles apart, and they are not the same place. Both sit on the Permian. Both live and die with the oil price, and the split between them is one of the sharper class divisions in American geography. Midland got the offices. It is where the operators, the geologists, and the money sit, and it has produced 2 American presidents' childhoods. Odessa got the field. Roughnecks, service companies, equipment yards. The shorthand locals use is that Midland is where you live and Odessa is where you work, and there is a well-known line about the difference in what people wear. Same rock, 20 miles, 2 entirely different towns. 10. When the price moves, the whole region moves with it. This is the defining feature of West Texas life, and it is not a metaphor. In the 1980s bust, Midland and Odessa lost banks, businesses, and people. In the 2010s boom, Midland at times had among the lowest unemployment rates in the country, hotel rates like a major city, and a housing shortage so severe that workers lived in temporary camps. Those camps have a name, man camps. Rows of modular units housing crews on rotation. A region where the population, the rent, and the road traffic are all downstream of a number set in a commodity market on the other side of the world. 9. The roads out here are being destroyed by the thing paying for them. A single fracked well requires an enormous number of truck trips, sand, water, chemicals, equipment, and then the produced water going back out. Those trucks run on rural county roads built for pickups and cotton trailers. The result is pavement failure across the Permian and stretches of road with fatality rates that make national news. Texas has put very large sums into Permian road funding, and the counties still cannot keep up because the tax base is severance revenue that mostly goes to the state. The most profitable ground in America, connected by roads that are falling apart. 8. They mine sand out here now because the sand is worth trucking. Fracking needs proppant, sand pumped into the fracture to hold it open. For years it came from Wisconsin because the grain shape was right. Then operators worked out that the sand dunes of West Texas were good enough, and being 300 miles closer beat being technically superior. An entire in-basin sand mining industry appeared inside a few years, so the dunes around Monahans and Kermit are being dug up and pumped back down into the ground a few miles away. There is a specific casualty. The dunes are habitat for the dunes, sagebrush lizard, and the fight over listing it has run for well over a decade. 7. Texas leads the country in wind power, and most of it is out here. The same emptiness and the same wind that made this land almost worthless for farming make it excellent for turbines. Texas generates more wind electricity than any other state by a wide margin, and a large share of that capacity stands on West Texas ranchland, often on the same properties, earning oil royalties. Landowners out there can be collecting a check from a pump jack and a check from a turbine in the same field, which is a strange thing to see, and it is the clearest evidence for what this video is actually about. The value of this ground has nothing to do with what is growing on it. 6. The land itself is close to useless. Say the part nobody says. Most of West Texas is poor country by every traditional measure. Rainfall in the far west runs under 12 inches a year, and in places under 9. The soil is thin. There is not enough grass to run cattle at any density. Ranches out there are measured in tens of thousands of acres because it takes that much ground to feed a herd. Nobody settled this land because it was good. They crossed it. The Spanish crossed it. The 49ers crossed it. The Butterfield Overland Mail crossed it in 1858, and the whole point of the route was getting through. For 300 years this was the part you survived on the way to somewhere better. 5. And then the value of a piece of ground stopped being about the surface. 1923. On land, belonging to the University of Texas. The Santa Rita No. 1 well came in. That land had been granted to the university system decades earlier, precisely because it was considered worthless. 2 million acres of West Texas nobody wanted. The oil under it built the Permanent University Fund, which is now one of the largest university endowments in the world, and underwrites the University of Texas and Texas A&M systems. The state gave away its worst land to its schools, and the worst land turned out to be the best. 4. Now the answer to number 27, and it is the whole explanation. Go back to the reef. 260 million years ago, a shallow tropical sea sat here with a living reef around its rim. Behind the reef in the still water, organic material settled into oxygen-poor mud and did not rot. Then the sea evaporated and dropped a thick layer of salt over everything, sealing it in. That single sequence produced 4 separate things. It produced the oil and gas because the organic mud was cooked at depth. It produced the stacked formations because the reef and basin built up in layers, which is why one well can pay out several times over. It produced the limestone that carries groundwater from the mountains to a spring in the desert at Balmorhea. And it produced the salt, which is what is dissolving under Wink and dropping the ground into holes. The fuel, the geology, the water, and the sinkholes. One dead reef, doing all 4. And it produced the desert too, because salt and limestone country with no rain grows nothing. 3. So the same fact made it worthless on top and priceless underneath. Put those two together because they are the same sentence. West Texas is dry, thin-soiled and empty because of what the Permian Sea left. West Texas is the most valuable ground in America because of what the Permian Sea left. The reason nobody wanted it is the reason it is worth what it is worth. That is why the university got it for nothing. That is why the state paid for its own capital with 3 million acres of it. That is why the Comanche could hold it for 2 centuries. Nobody else wanted to be there. Every valuation of this place before 1923 was correct about the surface and blind to the volume underneath. 2. And the volume underneath is being spent. The Permian is not a renewable position. 30 billion barrels have already come out of it. The current 6.6 million a day is drawn from the best remaining rock, and the industry's own language gives the game away. Core, acreage, Tier 1 inventory, remaining locations. Everybody in Midland can tell you roughly how many good wells are left. The number is finite and it is counted. Meanwhile, the water under the high plains is going, the roads are breaking, the ground is subsiding over old wells, and the produced water is going back into faults that answer with earthquakes. The oil is the asset. Everything else on this list is the cost of taking it out, and the costs stay when the oil leaves. 1. The most valuable ground in America is the ground nobody wanted. 260 million years ago, a tropical sea dried up here and left 3 things: a reef, a basin of oil-bearing mud, a layer of salt. What it left on the surface was rock, brush, and almost no rain. So the land went cheap, to the university as a consolation, to a ranching syndicate as payment for a building, to whoever would take it. Then somebody drilled. And here is the sting. The value was never in the land. It was in the sea that used to be there, and the sea is a fixed quantity. It stopped depositing 260 million years ago. Every barrel taken out is one that does not come back, and the people living on top of it are already counting how many are left. The most valuable ground in America is a dead reef in a desert, and the clock on it started the day the first well came in. That is 30. Tell me in the comments which one changes how you will see this place, and if you live out here, I still want the buckled road, the unplugged well, or the town that emptied in 18 months. Subscribe, and I will keep going underneath America. This has been States Explained. Thanks for watching. And remember, the map only ever shows you the top.